So let's talk about something hypothetical for a moment. But don't let that fool you. This scenario is rooted in some very real and very fragile parts of our global system. We're going to trace exactly how a single conflict in one tiny strip of water could kick off a chain reaction that spirals into a full-blown global food crisis.
Okay, so what are we looking at here? This is the Strait of Hormuz. And let me tell you, it's not just some random body of water. Think of it as a choke point, maybe the critical artery for the entire global economy. And its fragility? Well, that's a huge global risk that, honestly, most of us don't think about nearly enough.
I mean, just look at these numbers. They're pretty wild. Every single day, 20% of the world's oil flows through this narrow passage. But here's the kicker, and this is what's really crucial for our explainer today. It's not just about oil. A disruption here would trigger an immediate one-third cut in global fertilizer supplies. We're talking a direct hit to the very foundation of how we grow food around the world.
So the big question is, how does one regional crisis turn into a global catastrophe? Well, that's exactly what we're going to break down. We're going to trace the domino effect, step by step, and follow those shockwaves as they ripple out from this one single point of failure.
It sounds a little crazy, right? The idea that one conflict could literally break the global food system. But when you look closer, the connections, they're not just direct, they're frighteningly simple.
So here's how it all goes down. It's basically a 5-step cascade. First up, gas prices go through the roof because supplies get cut. That leads to step 2, fertilizer production, which needs natural gas, pretty much grinds to a halt. Then step 3, fuel and transport costs just explode. Step 4, without that fertilizer, farm yields plummet. We're talking up to 50% for some crops. And the final domino to fall? The price of something as simple as a loaf of bread could double overnight. And that cost gets passed directly on to all of us.
Okay, let's make this feel real. Take urea, for example. It's a super important nitrogen fertilizer. This chart here shows its price jumping from less than $500 a ton all the way to $700, and that's just in the first few weeks of this hypothetical crisis. Now imagine you're a small farmer in, say, India or somewhere in Africa. That kind of price hike, it's not just a problem, it's completely unaffordable. It puts you out of business.
But you know, this isn't just a simple story of supply and demand. The whole crisis gets supercharged by what experts call a behavioral amplifier. And it's exactly what it sounds like. It's when fear takes over. Governments slam the brakes on exports to protect their own citizens. At the same time, other countries start panic buying. And this totally human reaction is what turns what might have been a manageable shortage into a full-blown, out-of-control global price spiral.
Now, here's a twist that often gets overlooked. It's not just about goods, it's about people, the human supply chain. As Professor Mushfiq Melbarak from Yale points out, for a lot of developing nations, their most important connection to the Gulf isn't oil or fertilizer, it's people. We're talking about millions of migrant workers who send money back home. For their families and their countries, that money is an absolutely critical lifeline. And this chart really shows you just how deep that dependence goes. I mean, look at countries like Nepal and the Philippines. The money sent home by these workers, it's called remittances, makes up more than a quarter of their entire economy. So when a conflict hits the region, that flow of money just dries up. And boom, you've got a second parallel economic crisis happening at the exact same time.
So let's zoom in now and talk about the real human cost. Because behind all these supply chains, these charts, this economic data, there are real people. And they're the ones facing the devastating consequences. So, okay, you add up the soaring food prices, the fertilizer shortages, and that collapse in money being sent home. What does that actually do to the global fight against poverty? The number is just staggering. According to projections from the World Food Program, a crisis like this would push an additional 44.6 million people into what's called acute food insecurity. To put that in perspective, that is more than the entire population of Canada suddenly finding themselves unable to get enough food to eat. And of course, this pain isn't spread out equally, not at all. The data shows that sub-Saharan Africa would be hit the hardest, bearing the brunt of the crisis with over 28 million people affected. Asia would be next, then the Middle East and Latin America. Why? Because these are the regions that are heavily dependent on imported food and fertilizer, and they just don't have the capacity to absorb a shock of this magnitude. You know, there's a simple and, frankly, brutal piece of math that development economists use. It goes like this. For every single 1% increase in global food prices, another 1.2 million people are pushed into extreme poverty. It's a direct, unforgiving multiplier effect.
And the damage here goes way beyond just economics. This slide gets into something called trauma spillovers. So you've got the immediate trauma that hits the migrant workers and their families back home. But then there's this other layer, vicarious trauma. It spreads through the news, through social media, and it creates this wave of anxiety and hopelessness in vulnerable communities far, far away from the conflict. It actually erodes the confidence and hope that people need to even try to escape poverty.
Okay, so this is a really grim picture, I know. But it forces us to ask a really critical question. Is our current way of responding to crises like this just fundamentally broken? And if it is there a better way to do things?
The problem is, the traditional aid model is just incredibly fragile. And what's so devastatingly ironic is that the very conflict creating all this poverty also cripples the organizations that are supposed to fight it. The whole funding pipeline just breaks down. Think about it. Defense budgets swell up, pulling money away from aid. Local economies get wrecked, so private donations dry up. And the result? A catastrophic 30 to 50% drop in funding, right at the moment it's needed the most. The aid system itself becomes a casualty of the crisis.
A situation like this just screams for a total paradigm shift. We have to move away from the old model of poverty alleviation, which, let's be honest, is passive and totally dependent on outside money. The idea is to move towards something called a wealth discovery framework. It's a completely different approach. It's active, it's driven by a community's own resources, and it's designed to be anti-fragile, which means it can actually get stronger when it's hit by shocks.
And the core idea is actually pretty simple, but it's incredibly powerful. Instead of just shipping in bags of food, the goal is to discover and then activate the hidden wealth that already exists inside a community. What does that look like? Well, it could mean finding a local group of artisans who could export their goods, or helping farmers pivot to new drought-resistant crops they can sell. It's all about mapping assets, spotting opportunities, building skills, and really enabling the entire local ecosystem to support itself.
This new way of thinking is really built on 4 strategic shifts. First, you move from just providing stuff to enabling people. Second, you ditch the one-size-fits-all solutions and instead create plans that actually fit the local context. Third, you go from a bunch of scattered, fragmented projects to a truly integrated system. And finally, and this is so important, you make sure that even in a crisis, every single action is a step toward long-term development, not just a short-term band-aid.
Which brings us to a final, really powerful question. It kind of reframes this whole challenge. When a crisis like this is on the horizon, should our first instinct be to just deliver aid, to fill a deficit, or should it be to help communities discover the wealth and the capacity they already have within themselves to build a truly resilient future?